Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Social Confoes, a brand new episode. I'm your host, Shaluk, together with Diego. Diego, how are you today?
I am doing good, actually. This is a very, very busy week. I had to rush home because I was on a shoot today. So, yeah, made it in time. Glad we are having these weeklies again. And today, with another interesting guest, we are being joined all the way from Massachusetts by Dr. Virginia Lemos. And she's a social scientist and researcher with a passion for helping entrepreneurs find their purpose, flow, uh, and grow through inclusive and sustainable business practices. So it's kind of interesting to hear more about that,
Yeah, like
research
we might
part
get
and
stuck a little bit
entrepreneurship,
on
and
the
then
entrepreneurial part before we
yeah,
go on to the next. Yeah.
and also more on the mental resilience side. Why I think because if you look back at the past 2 3 episodes, we've been talking about a lot about health, right? So we got the physical health, dealing with chronic illness, and one thing that's kind of like Matthew told us in the last episode, that mental resilience, and I'm curious to hear from Virginia on her what her research has taught us on that mental resilience. And
It's
just
almost
to
like
keep
we
it
had it
short,
planned,
yeah, it just
like the
worked out,
flow. Yeah.
serendipity. So not to make her wait too long, Virginia, welcome to Social Confoes. And
Hello.
we are so happy to have you. And just to give Sean Luke a quick intro on how we met, I actually met Virginia in Portland when I was out on the
Mhm.
exchange program.
Yep.
So, uh, kind of funny how things work out, right?
Yeah,
So,
totally.
I didn't meet her at, she met the other fellows at, I think it was a networking event. I was still
Yep.
at work or
At
something.
EPOP, yeah, it was at EPOP. Mm-hmm.
And then she just invited everyone to a barbecue on a rooftop
Oh
apartment.
wow.
And,
Oh wow. That's nice.
It's
uh,
true. It's true. Yeah. I just up until just a few weeks ago, I was living in Portland, Oregon. I moved there about 4 years ago for my doctoral residency. My background's in clinical psychology, and after that wrapped up, I got involved with the business development community and started a position as programs manager at a nonprofit organization called Accelerate, which focuses on providing women entrepreneurs, small business owners with the tools, resources, and community that they need in order to grow their business. So, not so much a focus on launching, but rather growing and scaling their business. So, I was in that position, and part of that role was community outreach and engagement. And I was tabling at I think it's called the Emerging Professionals Organization through the Portland Business Alliance. And I met a few of the fellows there. It was very serendipitous, right? I heard that word come up. And then I'm really passionate about supporting immigrant and diverse populations through in entrepreneurship, and a couple of the fellows are Brazilian and I'm Brazilian, and the Brazilian community in Portland is really small. And so when we connected on our cultural identity and our immigrant identities, I was like, you and I, we're all going to be best friends. Let's barbecue, let's explore Portland. And then Diego and I connected through that group. It's just funny how things work
So
out.
was it a regular barbecue or was it a churrasco?
It was
it's
oh,
a
Diego.
mashup of,
Yeah.
yeah, a mashup of Latin, I don't know,
It
stuff.
was I mean, I wasn't manning the grill. That
Yeah,
was that it was Boris?
Boris. It
It
was
was
Boris.
Boris manning
Yeah.
the grill. But I live in this, beautiful apartment building in downtown Portland, and we were able to
Oh, there was a
reserve.
beautiful sunset
It
that
was a
you did
beautiful
too.
sunset. We got a little spot on the rooftop patio, and we just had a great time. It
Until we
was
got told by security to go
to
home.
leave because we were having too much of a good
That
time.
sounds very familiar. But I quickly
Yeah.
do want to try. Want to want to take a side note and sidestep
Mhm.
towards your heritage because you're
Mhm.
from traditionally from Brazil.
I
How did you
am.
end up in the U.S. and what and so up till now, why did you decide to move from Portland to actually to Massachusetts?
So I moved to the United States with my mom back in 1999. I was 6 years old. So I moved to the US very small, and we actually landed in New York and we moved to New Hampshire. So I grew up in southern New Hampshire. I would say I would call Nashua, New Hampshire my home, just over the border. Now I'm in Massachusetts, in central Mass, in a little town called Leominster, but grew up, in the Northeast. And um, I mean, also a very entrepreneurial community. My mom is an entrepreneur. She started her own cleaning service business back in the day, and helped with that when I was a kid, as many immigrant communities do. And yeah, there's a very big Brazilian community here in the Northeast. It spans and it's grown and it's evolved over the past 20 plus years, obviously, as it does, but it's really robust. And I've been very involved, back and forth. Right, my immigrant identity is very important to me, but as many immigrants, children who moved to the U.S. at a young age, I lived in two worlds, right? I lived in the American white culture world, a system that I had to learn to navigate at a very young age. And first learning the language, right? I started elementary school in the U.S. First grade, dove in. I remember trying to communicate with my teachers and really not being able to. I was living in a very small town called Milford, New Hampshire, and they actually had to launch their English as a second language program because I was the first student that they had who spoke a different language that they had to teach English to as a second language. And so I found myself from
So
a
at the
very
age
young
of 6,
age.
you are already pioneering new ideas.
Yeah, and it's funny. I remember I was actually having a conversation with my family the other day about how I was the first child who non-English speaker. They had to launch the English as a second language program. They kept me back a year, so I did the first grade twice, but picked up English pretty quickly, as young children do. And then when more children started moving in, again, Brazilian community grew rapidly over in the early 2000s, in the Northeast. And there were a lot of children in the same position as I was, coming into this school district. And the school, like the staff, they started calling me down to the office to translate for these parents coming in with new children and get children enrolled in the school. And so very, like, again, very from a young age, kind of being put into this role of systems navigator for immigrant communities in the Northeast. And so it's a role that I adopted early on. I really am very passionate about community building and supporting and bringing access to those who may not be familiar or fluent with the systems that they're stepping into, making it something that they're able to navigate and develop fluency in, so that they can be successful as they step into new cultures and new environments.
Speaking of new cultures and new environment, so you briefly described how you ended up and kind of what you had to deal with in New Hampshire. So, how much of the Brazilian culture have you kind of maintained? Have you gone back to Brazil? Like, how have you perceived that? And on the
Mm-hmm.
other end of the spectrum, you also moved to Portland, which is
Yeah,
from East Coast to West Coast. It's also a drastic,
it
I'd say,
is.
culture shift. So,
It
how would
is. Yeah.
you compare those two to each other?
Oh my gosh, you're asking all the deep questions. Great questions too. So I have been back to Brazil a handful of times since moving to the U.S. I decided to, pursue a very rigorous academic life, and so that I think interfered with my ability to travel and be more present in with my family. I still have a huge part of my family is still in Brazil, which I experience as a loss in a lot of ways, not being able to be present, be physically there as much as I would like to be. But it's also afforded me a lot of privilege in so many ways, and knowledge, and understanding the world, and having a different perspective. But anyways, when I'm in Brazil, as much as I haven't been able to spend a lot of time there, I still very much feel like home. And I think my mom and my aunts and uncles that have been here in the US with me, I thank them for that, because in my family it was very important that my language and my culture was preserved, and that I was exposed to that. And that's not true for many, I would say actually a lot of families. It's what's interesting is that the Brazilian, I'll speak to Brazil specifically, but the Brazilian culture in Brazil is very different than the immigrant Brazilian culture in the US. It's a different culture. It's a different way of being. If you think about it, a lot of immigrants come to the US chasing the, quote unquote American dream, the white picket fence, financial security, financial stability, education for their children. And that comes with a sacrifice in, preserving culture and heritage, in this battle of will to survive and to thrive in a country that's not theirs, that's not built for them, right? And so there's a sacrifice that happens, in order to acculturate, in order to assimilate with the larger society. And I grew up around a lot of families where the parents didn't speak English, they spoke Portuguese only, and the children spoke only English. Imagine the disconnect there between parent and child, where there's a complete barrier in communication, because the children's completely, immersed in American culture, but parents are still navigating their own, their own language, speaking only in Portuguese, and they struggle to communicate. And that happened a lot. I saw many families have to kind of navigate that, where child and parent, had to find a way to bridge that communication. But then I also saw families where the parents all kind of abandoned their cultural identity and fully assimilated to American white culture, and sacrificed the language and the culture and the heritage and what they experienced in their home culture countries in order to fully immerse in what American society expected them to be. And I feel like that's even more of a loss, right? That when you completely give away this huge part of your identity, that heritage, that culture, the beauty of that diversity is really lost, and a part of ourselves is lost. So in my family, I feel truly blessed in so many ways. My mom sent me to Brazil to live with my aunt for 2 years when I was a teenager, because I started struggling to be able to with my fluency, essentially. Like my Portuguese, I could still speak, but I wasn't fluent. And she was like, no, go back 2
Emergency boot
years.
camp.
Emergency boot camp, go back. And that was a really important experience. I have friends there that I still am in contact with, friendships that I established in middle school.
And which part of Brazil was this, or where you
Uh,
live?
I was born in São Paulo, so big metropolitan city, but I went and stayed with my aunt in a little coastal town in southern Brazil, in Rio Grande do Sul, called Xangri-Lá, a suburb of Capão da Canoa. It's very, very small. It has very much like, you know,
So even
like,
there, you had like a difference in like your
yeah,
home, the town you're born in, and
yeah.
going on a quote unquote boot camp.
An immersive boot camp. It totally was, and it was very different. The school structure. I was in the 7th, 8th grade, and I was used to the academic year in the U.S. being from September to June. All of a sudden, I go there, and the academic year there is from it's from March to September, because the
It's all
summer.
different.
It's
Even
all different.
even the sports seasons are different,
The
like
sports
compared to
seasons are different.
the rest of the world.
Summer, all of a sudden, my winter is summertime, and I'm celebrating the holidays on the beach. Getting my tan on. All in all, I think like the beauty of that is that I reclaim my culture, right? My language, my family roots. I strengthen that. I also develop new friendships, and and I think a theme for tonight that we're talking about too is resilience. It made me adaptable. I think it made me flexible and really appreciative of the differences in perspectives and way of being and way of living, and the beauty in that, right? A marker of resilience is being able to adapt. And so I think I I feel very fortunate to have had these very diverse and wide range of experiences, because I can come into a situation and adapt pretty quickly to the circumstances and my environment.
I want to
Mm-hmm.
quickly dive into that because
Mm-hmm.
there's
Okay.
a word that you mentioned, and you specifically said assimilate. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
very major difference between assimilation and integration. And
Yeah.
often when we talk about policy making, it's always integration. We need to integrate immigrants. We need to integrate, and we never really talk about assimilate.
Yeah.
And to my personal experience, I also assimilated to the point that I didn't want to say where my heritage is from because I didn't want to have the conversations and I wanted to continue on with the conversation we were having. So what I would like, I'm very interested in. I also don't know if you research this from a scientific perspective,
Yeah.
but do you feel like assimilating into culture is better than integrating when it comes to building a business in a new place where you're going to, or do you feel like we should be very careful not to assimilate too much, like you mentioned with assimilation often comes the sacrifice of losing your heritage. So how do you feel between assimilation and
Yeah.
integration when it comes to especially entrepreneurship?
That's a great question. Assimilation and integration are very two different are very different experiences, where integration is I think like the welding of two different things, or various different things, but as component parts of something greater that still maintain the integrity of what they are, right? That's integration, and that's really beautiful. Integration, think interdependency, right? Each being what they are, but coming together to create something different or something greater. Whereas assimilation, it's becoming something a part of a greater whole at the expense of what you are. Like, you don't maintain the integrity of your core
So it's like
being.
being taken over, like.
Exactly. Exactly. And if we like just sitting with that, I don't know about you, for me, like it hurts. It physically hurts. So yes, my personal experience and opinion is integration much better than assimilation. Where integration, you don't have to sacrifice who and what you are. Assimilation does come with that sacrifice, and it comes with a loss, right, of a core being or a core entity, whatever that may be. And I think when it comes to entrepreneurship, um, integration allows for differentiation, right? And we are now in a very competitive marketplace, especially post COVID, where you have to show up and be different than your competitors. And that's just a reality. You have to show up and be authentic in who you are, being part of a greater whole, whether that's a business ecosystem. The digital business ecosystem is a whole nother thing, right? You have to stand out. You have to show up. You have to show up authentically in your ingenuity in order to draw in your customers and your consumers in a way that they can relate to you, and in a way that you're not going to lose their attention or their loyalty or their engagement with you to competitors that are just like you, right? Because then you lose traction, essentially. And so again, fan of integration, right? You have to integrate into the system and the dynamics of the business that you're developing and how it fits into the larger business and development environment and ecosystem and resources available to you, but you shouldn't do that at the expense of what the business is doing and the problem that it's solving for, as well as its vision, mission, and values, which today are the markers of any brand identity, right? You have to have a sense of self, right? The business has to have a sense of self in order to stand up and compete in this very, robust marketplace that
Yeah,
we live.
between all the noise, you need
Yeah,
to stand out.
you
I
do.
want to quickly like link that assimilation and resilience part, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you basically your mom was like, nope, you're going back, and that kind of helped you build that resilience. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know from what you've experienced or from what you've seen how other immigrants kind of operate in this in the US society. Like, is
Mm-hmm.
it, are they pressured? Like, how can they build that resilience, that mental resilience? Because you kind of got to see both sides of the coin, and you are
Mm-hmm.
forced to like nurture both sides of the coin,
Mm-hmm.
whereas they're kind of pressured by society in that. Like, how can
Mm-hmm.
they break out? How can they like um, I won't say keep a guard up, but like be more open-minded to build up those, that resilience.
Mm-hmm. Well, um, that's a great question. Um, Resilience. I think I'll take a step back and talk first about stress, distress, and trauma, because I don't think you can have a conversation about resilience without just recognizing the fact that being an immigrant is in and of itself a pretty traumatic event. Not like there's big T trauma and small T trauma, and I think being an immigrant can encompass all of that. But you get a culture shock, right? You go from what you know to something that you completely don't know, and lots of uncertainty, and lots of discrimination comes up. It's true. We live in the world, and I think especially in the US, I mean, we've seen there's um, a lot of assaults on immigrant and diverse populations on BIPOC folks, and so I think that it's important to honor that. And at the core of trauma is shame, essentially, in my perspective. And I think a lot of immigrants, especially coming into this white culture, which is very idealistic, it has a lot of ideals that are very hard to attain, and that puts you down if you don't reach those unreachable ideals, right? If you look on Instagram, if you look on TikTok, wherever whatever social media you're consuming, it's all this like FOMO, YOLO culture, very very beautiful, even filters now like completely alter what people look like and what is real, and it fosters this sense of insufficiency, of scarcity is a big term too, like growth mindset versus scarcity mindset. I'm sure you've heard, but it fosters a sense of like I'm not enough, and in order to be enough, I need to alter completely who I am, or there's the hustle culture too, but it's constantly chasing after something that is very superficial, that's very hard to achieve, and at the end of the day it may not even really align with your values and your belief systems and who you are, right? And so that's the sacrifice that you ultimately, people are chasing something that's unsustainable, inviable, and completely disaligned with who they are as human beings at their core, which are their core beliefs and their value systems. And so this fosters shame and the sense of like, I can't show up authentically. I can't be who I am in this society and culture that doesn't value how I show up in this space, and that wasn't created for me. And that causes stress, and that causes distress, and that can lead to trauma, which then leads to anxiety, worry, fatigue, depression, insomnia, all of these chronic health conditions that we see people experiencing. And that's all very true. Not and think of, that's just the immigrant I'm speaking specifically to that experience, but and then you're also coming in and carrying the baggage of the traumas that you may have left behind in your home country. And so how do you make sense of all of this, right? Resilience isn't the ability to avoid or prevent trauma or difficult things from happening. To clarify, resilience is the ability to adapt to stressful and distressing situations. And the first step towards that is knowing who you are and what your values are, and being very clear about where your boundaries lie. Right? What is me? What is you? And what is us? And in that, allowing that to lead the way, or at least inform how you go about your day-to-day life and how you take care of yourself, right? For me, for example, culture and my heritage is really important to me, so I let that dictate how I choose to live my daily life. And also just being aware that this is happening, this is real. This isn't just all in our heads, these emotional experiences and this shock of like, I'm being discriminated against. They say microaggressions, if you haven't heard, if you have, yeah, great. Microaggressions, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's the little harmful things that happen that people say to you on a day-to-day basis, the change in tone that people take on with you specifically just because you have an accent, right? Or someone who speaks louder when you're trying to get clarifying information, but they just repeat the same thing at a louder tone. I don't know about, I've experienced it, I don't know about y'all, but it's the most infuriating thing, because it's it's essentially a sense of like, I'm not dumb, I can understand you. Speaking louder isn't going to help me understand what you're trying to tell me, or what we're trying to communicate. But I think the first step to addressing to building resilience is recognizing that these experiences are real, that we're not just crazy. Like this is not, people may try to, say this doesn't happen, it's all in your head. It's not. And so breaking down the shame behind that, not blaming the self or the community, right? There's strength in numbers, by the way. That's the next step, is where I'm going, is like finding your community, finding people that you identify with, that can help you preserve your identity, and the integrity of who you are and where you come from. That is so important in speaking to these experiences. Shame, it grows exponentially in isolation. It does. And so does trauma. The more isolated we are, which is also a consequence of trauma, right? Because it fosters the shame. Trauma is the feeling of, it's the sense that you're not able to overcome the challenging things that are happening to you. And really, in order to overcome them, you have to be willing to understand that it's not your fault, that these things are happening to you, and to ask for help. And so to counteract and build resilience, growth and resilience, they're fostered in collaboration and community. They're fostered in dialogue and in understanding your values and preserving them. And surprisingly, also taking risks and being willing to do the hard things in service of aligning with who you are. Does that make sense?
Yes, you actually made the link for us already, because I wanted to ask next, like, how does community development, community building play a role into this? So to double down on that part, like you spoke about values, is knowing what your values are, and finding a community,
Mm-hmm.
and then the next question for me comes up, like, how can a community like define their values, because it's made of individual components, individual
Mm-hmm.
people,
Mm-hmm.
although they may have, some common heritage, they're still individuals
Of course,
with their
yeah.
own, ideals. So how can you shape or form or communicate values as a community as you develop that?
I mean, I think the key word here is communication. It's putting yourself out there, right? And I think that that's really hard, especially in the context that we're speaking of, in addressing things like shame, right? It's hard to show up and be yourself and put yourself out there if you feel ashamed of who you are. But at the same time, it's the antidote, it's the cure for shame. Like, you putting yourself out there, yeah, you risk rejection and people not accepting you. And guess what? That's okay. Not everybody's going to like you. But it's in putting yourself out
Mhm.
there that you find people that you can relate to, and speaking essentially your truth, and speaking to your values and how you want to, exist in the world and with whom.
So, in this sense, how is shame different from being vulnerable?
Vulnerable. Oh, I love. Have you heard of Brene Brown?
Yes, yes. So
Yeah,
in light of Brene Brown's
love
TED
Brene
talk,
Brown.
when we talk about shame, because and these are like really small differences
Yeah.
between shame and vulnerability. So I was wondering like what's the difference there if we look from it, and of course you're allowed to use it from a
Mm-hmm.
psychological perspective as well. So because I'm wondering sometimes if it's shame or just being afraid to be vulnerable, being afraid to lose a certain status. Because for an immigrant, like, you work hard for
Mm-hmm.
a certain status.
Yeah, I
So once
do.
you've achieved it, it's sometimes in some cases people don't want to be vulnerable because that would allow somebody else to to take their place or compete instead of it just being shame that they don't want to. So
Totally.
is there some resemblance, or is it should we also be careful to use those words interchangeably?
I would say be careful of using those words interchangeably. You're spot on, Jean-Luc. I think shame comes from fear, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of discrimination, fear of violence. I mean, those are all very true and real things, and I think especially um, immigrant communities experience that a lot, right? There's a certain level of risk, and this isn't even getting into like immigrants of undocumented status, right? And that has its own feeling of like persecution. um just the term illegal alien to me is just so unsettling, uh so unsettling. And yeah, we still use terms like this, and it literally alienates people. It makes them feel like that they are wrong. And shame is related to self-worth, right? It's like, I'm not worthy. I'm at not just it's dangerous for me to put myself out there, but it's also that I won't be valued if it doesn't, like, I am not a person of value. Like, when that's not true. We're all equally valuable, right? We are endlessly valuable as human beings. But there's a tag on that value when it comes to I think being there's a price tag that comes with being an immigrant in so many ways, where you do have to battle for it, where there is this very, very cutthroat, competitive feel, right, to being an immigrant, and really you fight to survive every day. And when you reach a certain level of success, I feel like it gets even more cutthroat, because it's like, I did this. There's pride there, right? There's pride, like, I overcame. And it almost like, from that viewpoint, people look down on the other folks that are coming in and trying to get, do their own thing, and they're like, it's a rite of passage. I had to do it, so you have to do it. You have to go through it too, right? So figure it out. And that to me is so disheartening. Again, I hold the belief that growth happens in collaboration and in community, and when we help each other out, we all grow and succeed. But there is this very competitive, like, I got here because of me. Nobody helped me, so I'm not going to help you. Number one. Number two, there's just not. I feel like it's that scarcity mindset where it's like, there's not enough even for me. How am I going to lend you a hand when I'm barely helping myself? Right? There's not enough. There's just not enough. And that's also really heartbreaking because there is enough. We do there is enough to go around, and the more we give, the more we receive, and that's a fundamental law of the universe. At least how I experience the universe. I found even being here today, having this conversation. This feels like a consequence of me being like, yes, let's join forces, let's do this together, let's be here together. But I forget the original question. This is where we are right now. Remind me.
No. Yeah, I answered it quite well. So if I got it
Okay.
correctly, like vulnerability is more from fear, and
Mm.
shame is more from self worth. Was it that?
Um,
Okay.
that this was all about shame. So
Yeah. Okay.
vulnerability is actually the only way to really wholehearted living. It's about taking risks. It's about putting yourself out there, in showing up authentically, even when the circumstances and situation are like don't feel good. It's about putting yourself in the way of opportunity at risk of discomfort. Right. So let me give an example. I was tabling that day, right, at the EPOP event where I met the YLI fellows. And to be honest, it had been a long day. I actually just wanted to go home. I was really tired. I wanted to go home. I was ready for that clock to hit, 7 p.m. so I could go home, have myself a cup of tea and rest. And in order to connect on a human level, you have to, give a bit more of yourself than you are maybe in that moment willing to. You have to be vulnerable. And so when I forget, it might have been Boris, I'm not sure. Somebody came up to my table and was like, hey, these fellows are actually going to be here, in half an hour. You should hang out. And I was like, I don't want to have to talk about myself or introduce myself or tell the story about myself. What if they don't like me? What if think about all the statements of what
Yeah,
if,
yeah, the risk of rejection
the
of
risk of rejection. What if this doesn't pan out, or what if they judge me, or what if. It's about kind of like saying, well, it's the opposite of that scarcity. It's like, well, if they like me, they like me. If they don't, they don't. I'm willing to still put myself out there and be vulnerable, and kind of see where this goes. And if it's something that's going to bring wholesome, meaningful connection and experiences, and ultimately at the end of the day, it's vulnerability leads to opportunity, to meaning making, to genuine authentic connection, whereas shame leads to isolation, lack of risk taking, and disconnection. Two very different experiences.
just looking at Jean-Luc if that clarifies that part for him, because then I want to make the link because you mentioned risk a couple of
Yeah,
times now,
risk taking.
and and this in the context of this mental resilience, this on a personal level, and one thing that plays in the topic of entrepreneurship is risk. That's a big factor. So
Huge.
I'm curious to see, because you yourself uh, have gone from the research part to your own entrepreneurial journey. So
Yeah.
how has that concept of risk kind of translated from one to the other for you?
Oh, Jean-Luc, are you jumping in before I dive into that one? Because that's a whole nother monologue. But I'll go for it. So I think today I am a fan, and I'll tell the story, but I'm a fan of the term calculated risk. Risk is necessary. Risk is necessary. This is especially in entrepreneurship. You need to put yourself out there. You need to give more than you're getting in order to get more back, right? Have a return. You have to invest in order to get a return on your investment. And that investment might be time or resources or bandwidth, or, as we all know, sleep. Um, Sometimes we sacrifice sleep in service of building our business, and that happens. I don't know a single entrepreneur that doesn't sacrifice or give something more than they have in order to, you know, experience or build something bigger than they could ever even imagine or they envision, right? Um, and to be honest, I failed miserably my first round through entrepreneurship, and I mean hardcore, like hardcore. And I so after I wrapped up my residency, this was, pandemic. I was in healthcare when COVID hit, y'all. It was very intense, and it was very enlightening. That I was that point that I was like, I don't want to be in healthcare. There's so much burnout. There's so much who. There's not enough support for the practitioners who are in the front lines, supporting our communities. And I had nothing left to give at that point. When you reach that point of, burnout, essentially where you give and you give and you give and you give, and there's just not enough support around you, it's hard to continue giving, right? You're depleted. And so I decided to take 6 months off between the end of my residency and the postdoc that I had lined up to rest. And it was great. I was like, I'm going to rest, but I'm restless. I'm a restless individual, and that's me. And that is who I am. And I own it now. I had a friend at the time who said, I am working Grubhub. I'm doing deliveries. And I had dabbled in doing deliveries too at the time, COVID era. I needed to make some residents don't get paid very much, believe it or not. We just don't. And so I needed to have some side income. I was doing deliveries too. And he was like, hey, online ordering platforms are abusing small business owners and restaurant owners. They are,
If you hear the cut they take, it's
yeah,
insane. It's
it's
insane.
it's over 25%. It's over 25% of the but it's so predatory. And
Uber Eats had 30 us even or something. It was
yeah,
insane.
listen to this though. And this is where research comes in for me. When small businesses, their doors were closing and these online ordering platforms are thriving, you have to question. You have to question the system. Why? Why are you thriving, and why are their doors closing? If you're thriving, shouldn't they be thriving? Think about it, right? If you're getting a lot of orders, technically aren't they supposed to be getting those orders? No. Not to call out online ordering platforms, but totally calling out online ordering platforms. Their cut is 25 to 30%, where small businesses, restaurants, their profit margins are 5 to 7%. If you take 30% of the revenues for their orders, you're annihilating them. You're annihilating them. Small
Not to
businesses,
mention that they have to pay taxes as well.
they have to pay taxes. And you know what the worst part is? It can be prevented. It doesn't have to be that way. It's only that way because that's how they've set up their fee structures and built their business around it. So it's very difficult to change. And so, what we did, he was like, I want to build an online ordering platform. We're going to change how it's done. We're going to figure this out. And I was like, cool. I want to do something completely different. I want to not be a clinical psychologist right now. Let's launch a startup tech company. And so we did that. I became very passionate about social impact entrepreneurship. I was like, let's go solve this problem. And then when we figured out that we could do it, we could change the fee structure. The technology's there. Like, it's not about the technology. It's not about it's about business practices. And this is where the inclusive and sustainable business practices comes in, because I was like, when I figured out that it's choice, you choose to help or you choose to hurt. That's it. And if you choose to help, you can figure out how to build your business and engage in practices where everybody wins. You can. And it leads to long-term and sustainable growth. Guess what? The online ordering platforms are really struggling. They're going to continue to struggle because they've built fee structures that aren't sustainable. When they depend on small restaurants to survive, if they're closing their doors, at the end of the day, all they can do is bump up their fees. That's how they built their fee structures. And that's only going to close down what they depend on at the end of the day in order to make money. See how it's unsustainable? It's really about choice and foresight. You have to think about the consequences of how you build your business when you're building your business. People don't think about that, but it's actually like a critical part. And so we built this business, and guess what? We also didn't have foresight about different types of things, and that's part of the entrepreneurial journey. For example, it's really expensive to build an app. At the it's
A
so
workable
expensive.
app according to all the
That's
regulations? Yes.
that's according
That
to the
has a proper
regulation.
security? Yes.
Yes, that can process online payments, that can scale. The question about any business, if you, because small businesses, any type of entrepreneurial journey is in a really, if, at the end of the day, let's be real, financial freedom, right? Isn't that what everybody's after? People want time and financial freedom so that they can spend time doing the things that they actually want to be doing instead of trading your time for money, working a 9 to 5, right? And so if you think about, social justice and immigrants chasing entrepreneurial journeys, it's about security, it's about stability, it's about going from surviving to thriving. It's about generational wealth attainment. This is what it's about. It's about breaking the cycles of disenfranchisement, disempowerment, and poverty. This is what it's about, y'all. Like, this is what it's about. And going back to the entrepreneurial journey, developing an app that is sustainable and scalable, the barrier is cost. That we were priced out. We were priced, and the by the way, software development, that system is also really predatory. If you've ever taken your car to the mechanic not knowing anything about the car, they could say, the valve line gasket is busted, and you're like, sure, great, like fixed, that part doesn't exist, but I wouldn't know. You could talk to a software developer, an app developer, and they could be like, your app needs cha in order to be scalable, and and it costs 25,000 $100 billion more to do that. And you're like, great. If you're not a coder and you don't know, you're gonna find out very quickly that you have to kind of have the basic foundational knowledge of app development in order to just have conversations with app developers and be like, no, that's not what I want. And I can't tell you how many of those conversations I had, but either way, we were priced out. It was $250,000 to develop a sustainable and inclusive app with an equitable fee structure for small businesses. And we were able to raise about 80,000 before we went broke, because we were dedicating over, I was working, I was like, I want to take a break. I started working 24/7 as an entrepreneur. Right? That's what you do.
This is such an interesting conversation. It
Yeah.
really is. It really is.
Yeah.
Because and this is also like coming from my personal background. I want to bootstrap everything.
Yeah.
So I find it really interesting. But this is the same thing that happened to me with my first business. Is that I
See,
totally
we're not alone. We're not alone.
I totally overspent. And here's the thing: even though I could have the product made locally, I imported it, which was totally unnecessary. But just I was convinced I needed a certain quality, just like you were convinced you needed a certain quality of an app. You could have
Yeah.
also built the same app for 2,500, and when you had over a K, 100K revenue, could have upgraded the app.
Yeah.
But it's the first mindset that we had discussions, and at a certain point, I had a discussion with my business partner in the first, and he was talking about we need business cards. I need a new laptop, and in the end, we
You don't.
we totally overspent on the product, on the base product, and it wasn't feasible to break even. It cost months and months to break even. Whereas we could
Yeah.
have done a completely different route, but that's the only way of learning. And I mean, there's so many. There's a reason why they have a platform called Fuck Up Nights, where people talk about entrepreneurs how they messed up.
What is it? What is it called?
Fucked Up Nights, I think, right,
Yeah,
Diego?
yeah.
Yeah.
Drop that in the chat. I need that link so bad. Not gonna like, and I think
I think
going
it's
back to,
international. They have like
oh my
hubs
gosh,
in different parts of the
I
world.
can
So
feel, I can
something.
feel the, I can feel the shame leaving my body. See, this is what.
Like it's not what they talk about. So in entrepreneurship, like in entrepreneurship, we don't talk about like our failures. We just don't. We tell like, hey, this went well, this went cool, this is look at amazing how this amazing tech company built something in Silicon Valley. They don't talk about the 90% of businesses that just completely fail
Fail,
and get
fail,
crazy amounts of funding and never make it. It,
and
it. it
fail.
doesn't get talked about. And I have to be honest, like I've done so many, and I really got upset once. Uh, I got upset because basically Gary Vaynerchuk once said, "If you will work for a boss, you're not an entrepreneur." Like I was so upset by that statement. Like, yeah, but I run a business, and he was like, "No, as long as you're working for a boss, and at the end of the month you're getting a salary, you're not an entrepreneur." And you have to understand that to you have to experience that to understand what he means by that. And for me, I really only started becoming more successful as an entrepreneur when I was actually that was my only thing and my only main focus instead of doing it on the side.
Yeah.
And I had many, so yes, it's good for you to know that I had many, well, some are not considered failures, but in my eyes, where I was, where I wanted to go, and what I actually achieved completely don't line up. So
Mhm.
you can release
Failures
all the shame.
or growth opportunities,
Oh,
right?
I never failed. I have never
Yeah.
failed. No.
You've learned, or they're learning
Yeah.
opportunities. And I think that that's what entrepreneurship taught me. I came from, honestly, psychology and entrepreneur, like, I was a clinical, I was in clinical practice. So I was a therapist for 7 years. Um, and what, what just blew my mind was the only shift that I made really from going from being a therapist to being an entrepreneur was from focusing on pathology to focusing on growth. How can like pathology, illness, right, and growth, like how can I make this better? Right? How could this improve? It's already pretty good, but how can it be better? Um, and it blew my mind in just the reframe from failure, or let's reframe trauma and resilience, shame, vulnerability, pathology, growth. It's a shift. It's a gentle shift, but it's just enough to make it feel realistic, to make it feel attainable, to make it feel something like you can accomplish. And like I said, I failed. I radically failed, and I mean that in the sense of like I did not reach my desired outcome. Did not. I wanted to have this beautiful, sustainable, scalable platform on the Laravel, a cloud-based operating system, and it just wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't attainable, right? But I learned so much along the way. I learned how I was strong and what I could actually accomplish. Even having these outlandish goals, I didn't reach those goals, but the ones that I did, man, did I figure out how strong I was and what I was capable of in a very different environment, in a different setting. So I feel like entrepreneurship, it's not just a pathway for generational wealth attainment. It's also a pathway for self-understanding, like building resilience, if that's the mindset that you're going into it with, though, because you will face a lot of really, really hard challenges and setbacks, and it requires vulnerability and creative problem solving and asking for help and being like, hey, Diego, do you know such and such type of person or resource that I can tap into, because I cannot figure this one out, man. I can't. And it takes that willingness. It really does take that willingness at the end of the day.
And this comes back to what you mentioned before, the communication, the community building, building your network. So it's kind of all kind of intertwined. And I love to
That is
hear
what it
about
is.
the parallels that you've kind of experienced from, where you were and your journey now.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, the time went so fast. But
It
we
did.
have a final section of our show called Over Under. But before we go to that, I just saw a few comments come in. I think the comments from Facebook popped in very late. but apparently you already answered some of those. But there's one question here from Chloe. I hope I pronounced it correctly. How can I integrate my small business in a very conservative community without losing my place among my peers and without losing my
Mm,
identity or my heritage?
mm. Oh wow, that's quite the endeavor, right? To integrate into your community while also preserving where you're coming from,
And
especially
a
in the
very
business.
conservative community.
Very conservative community. Honestly, the biggest way that I found of preserving core beliefs, core identity, and core values as you launch into any type of business community is building it into your mission, vision, and values. It's not just like there's you have a product or service, right? You have an offering for your business. That is not your business. Okay, let's separate these two. Your product or service is essentially what you're offering as a solution to to a problem that your community has, right? So a restaurant feeds our community. That's the problem. People are hungry, they feed them. But the restaurant is the business, the food is the product, the experience is the product. But the business entity can value, for example, sustainable business practices in food, right? So they offer organic products. When you build, like, take a step back from the product or service that you're offering, and when you're building your business, it also makes you more resilient and agile. In doing so, because your business can offer any type of product or service. Think about it. If you have a restaurant but you want to launch your own coffee brand, launch your own coffee brand. The business that's launching those products or services are still the same. So when you build your business, when you launch, Rita's Taqueria, what does Rita's Taqueria stand for? Right? What does Rita stand for? Does she stand for, what does, and if it's community, if you stand for your community, then build, and when you build your website, and your about page, when you're like, this is what I'm about. Rita's Taqueria values community, and this is where I come from, and my heritage is what I value, and I build this into my business, and I embody it in my products and services in this way. Join me.
I, I think that's a very good way to put it. Like very few starting businesses, especially, kind of neglect coming up, with their mission, vision, and especially values to translate that. Just to recap, I watch a lot of YouTube and forgot her name, but she was on Graham Stephan's show, Jean-Luc. I'll look it back up, but what she essentially said, she has core values, and every decision she evaluates, they reflect back on the values.
I
Does
saw
it
that
align?
episode.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, I
Yes.
saw that episode. Yeah,
yeah. So,
yeah.
and that kind of click, like, it's your system, your decision matrix, basically, reflected back
Exactly.
to your
And
values.
another way of framing it is your theory of change. When theory of change modeling. So you start here. These are your values. This is the impact that you want to have, because your mission is your mission statement. What impact do you want your business to have? Your vision is, what do you envision this to be in the long term, right? And then your values are like, what do you stand for? And every decision you make, right, from your hiring practices to your sourcing practices to the seating arrangements to the events you produce, they're informed, I think, by your values. If my business values were like collaboration, collaboration, growth, and something else that I'm forgetting. But everything that we did was informed by collaborative practices and fostering growth. That's it. It can be
Us.
simple. Keep it and very, very clear. To who posed the question, 3 core values. That's it. And then find your values first, write your mission statement, then write your vision statement. Start with your core values because they inform the others.
Perfect. Very clear action.
Mm-hmm.
With that being said, Chanduk, I think we can do one over under
I think we
each.
can only do one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to kick off or do you want me to kick off?
Yeah, I can kick off. So, Virginia, we're gonna ask you, throw a topic at you. You just tell us if you think it's something overrated or underrated, and if
Okay.
it's controversial, you may briefly elaborate on it, just for
Okay.
fun. But we'll keep this as short as possible. So,
Okay.
mine, from listening to your story a bit, software as a service, overrated or underrated?
Well,
Underrated.
Diego.
I think it's underrated. It could I say this like there's a lot of value in it, but you have to know what value it has and how to leverage it to your benefit. Don't just dive in and do all of it. Be selective, do your research, but it's a really powerful, they're really powerful tools.
Okay, I'm gonna try to bring it back to the beginning of the conversation. Brazilian beaches, overrated or underrated?
Oh my gosh. I mean, they're amazing. I, I guess perfection. I'm gonna stray away.
So they're even
uh,
still now underrated for the fact how awesome they are.
underrated. You can't. There's no way to comment on it without being there, my friends. So underrated. Go see for yourself.
Agreed. You've been there last a few months ago, Shaduk, so
Oh,
you can
Yes,
what's
speak
your?
of
I
it.
What do
agree.
you think? Is it underrated or
No, I
overrated?
definitely think it's underrated. I think it's
It,
underrated because there's so much attention to Rio, and there's so many other good beaches in Brazil that people really don't know about.
and
I've
it's a
been,
shame.
yeah, I've been to Fortaleza, which is an
Mm-hmm.
awesome beach, quite heavy, but awesome beach.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been to, wow, I forgot the name already, but a little bit north of Belém. There's also
Billy. Yeah.
very great beach as well.
Mm-hmm. Brazil's a beautiful country.
Salina Lopulus, I think. Salina
Mm-hmm,
Lopulus, I
mm-hmm.
think.
My
Yeah.
one of my bucket lists is to just go travel Brazil and get to know the nature, the beautiful naturescapes that it has to
Yeah.
offer. Definitely underrated.
Awesome. We should plan
Awesome.
a road trip once you head down south again.
Yes, yes.
But with that being said, Virginia, it has been therapeutic to listen to you. uh, on that note, before we close off, is there anything you'd like to share with us what you're working on now? Have you shifted anything? And where can people connect with you?
Absolutely. You can connect with me on my Instagram page, Therapeutic Doses. I have linked in my Instagram page, this is my handle, my LinkedIn account as well. So you can reach me there. You can also just shoot me a DM and we'll go from there. I am working on a collaborative project while I take on supporting my own family's business. I'm doing operations management, but working on establishing a collaborative community and resource center for Brazilian immigrants in the Massachusetts space. So that's in the works, and I'll make sure to share more about that as it as it develops and grows.
Awesome.
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 So we really want to thank you for being
Thank you.
here and joining us, Diego. It was a pleasure as always. And we will be seeing you back on Social Confoes next week. Of course, I also want to close with a comment of Aragorn that it's a sexy show, not for Papegas. See you next week. Bye bye.
It's been an honor, y'all. Thank you so much.